A new year starts with new hopes, new opportunity, and yes, new challenges. As we enter 2023, many questions about what lies ahead persist. What will happen with inflation? Is a recession imminent? How will the housing market respond? We know that supply chain restraints aren't as pervasive as they once were, and COVID-related shutdowns appear to be a thing of the past. But as old challenges have dissipated, new ones have popped up in their place. Fortunately, here in the Inland Northwest, we aren't afraid of a little adversity. We are nothing if not resilient, resourceful, and perseverant. At the Journal of Business, we endeavor to keep you, our readers, informed about what's going on in your community. Our staff is dedicated to providing you with objective information on news and trends, with the goal of helping you become more successful on your chosen path. It's time to go beyond the sound bites. It's time for more depth than 140 characters can provide. It's time for elevating the conversation.
Welcome to Elevating the Conversation. My name is Lynn Parrish. I'm the editor of the Journal of Business, and I'll be your host for the next 45 minutes. I'm pleased to be joined today for our first webcast of 2023 by Katy Bruya, Chief Human Resources Officer at Washington Trust Bank. Welcome, Katy.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me. Nice to sit in front of a fire.
Yeah, we remembered to take the Christmas lights off. I wasn't sure if we were going to or not.
Yeah, that's funny.
So I guess a good place to start, talent acquisition, post-pandemic economy. I guess I wanted to start with our economic outlook at the end of last year. What we were reporting was a projection of no job growth this year. Unemployment rates were ticking up a little bit, and total employment growth was slowing, but that was in the context of those being historically great numbers, great in terms of people being employed and healthy for the economy. I guess when I look at that, if you think about it from the terms of a job seekers market or a employer's market, it sounds like it's still tilted toward the job seekers at this point. Is that your
Yes, impression? I would say that is absolutely true. I think this is the most worker-friendly job market we've seen in decades. For a multitude of reasons. And certainly the pandemic was a big part of that. And if you think back to, as we were commenting later before this talk about, can you believe 2020 and how we were all remote and kind of, we have the scars to live through that, right? And I've told my kids, this will be something they'll come to Nana years from now and like, you lived during COVID, right? Yeah. It's a really big deal. And it wasn't that long ago. And we're still feeling the effects of it from the economy and from the hiring side and the business side. So if you think about lots of things that made this so worker friendly is because of it's just straight economics, right? There's a lower supply of workers available for a multitude of reasons. And as such, employers have had to spend more money, be more creative, compete against employers they've never had to compete with before because of remote work. I think remote work just turned a lot of things on its head in terms of how we attract employees, how we retain them, how we motivate them. We sit in Spokane, Washington, and many of us have locations in other cities in Washington or other states, of course. But now we're competing for talent with, I kind of say other countries, not really, but possibly because people can come from all over and work remotely. And we certainly saw the impact of that in the housing market. And here's Spokane and Coeur d'Alene on the cover of the Journal, which we usually say means the Journal of Business, but also the Wall Street Journal. So here we're getting national attention for this crazy inflated housing market because so many people through the pandemic said, well, if I'm going to work behind a computer, I'm going to go sit in front of a lake or at a mountain or in front of a fireplace and not in front of some, corporate office. And so they came to the Northwest because we have a beautiful place to live and lots of recreation and short commutes, at least on the Eastern Washington side. And so they came here for a variety of reasons and ultimately have jobs here. And at the same time, that means that the candidate pool that is here also left and did other things or stayed here and now work for other companies.
Sure.
So even driving downtown where you and I both work, it's not as busy and bustling as we want it to be or as it used to be.
Sure.
And
sure.
Workers were kind of held hostage a little bit because they'll say, well, if you don't hire me, I can go work for someone else remotely, potentially even make a salary that's based in another state that is a higher salary than I get here. So see you later. And they're showing up in a lot of ways of demanding access to remote work immediately, having that be the first question they ask in interviews, sometimes ghosting us for interviews, ghosting employers on their first day of work, working for a week and saying, I got a better offer. That, I hate to sound like I'm a lady, but that longevity or that loyalty isn't there. They're just kind of like, hey man, what's in it for me? Because there's 3 different employers I have that I'm looking at. So what are you going to do for me?
Sure.
And that makes it really hard, as I'm sure many of our viewers can attest to get talented people to come work for you.
Sure. And, with the remote work component of it, it cuts both ways, because like Tom Simpson in his piece that he wrote for us a couple of weeks ago talks about how that could be a benefit, a big benefit to the tech sector here, where you have people moving in for lifestyle reasons who might be become affiliated with Spokane companies, whereas when they first came here, they worked for large companies elsewhere.
Right.
So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out.
Yeah, I think we definitely do, on the flip side, have access to talent that we did not have before.
Sure.
For businesses who do offer those remote capabilities, you are no longer just recruiting within Spokane proper or the region or the county. You now can go and recruit people from other areas and get them set up to work remotely. And it may have an impact on your culture and some of those things, but you could get access to talent that you may not find in your backyard.
Sure. I do wonder, though, if we are heading toward more of an old normal, sort of where, you're starting to see news, come in about different things that are more less attractive to the workers. So you see news of layoffs and in some cases thousands of people, usually at large companies elsewhere. So it's not something that we're feeling here in Spokane as much, but I'm wondering what the impacts of that kind of news are on the overall job market.
Yeah, that's a great question. And, I think some of us have lived through these cycles before.
Sure.
We have from the Great Recession, in 2008, and other buyers markets, sellers markets come to, so to speak, when it comes to employment. We do typically see layoffs in certain sectors and certainly bigger markets. And we're seeing a lot of that right now in Seattle. But Nike downtown closed. We've seen stores shutter. Like Macy's left Spokane a long time ago, and they were shuttering their retail footprint in many stores because of going online, delivering in a different way to customers.
Sure.
Tech sector, Microsoft, Amazon, in preparation for the recession, they're eliminating positions. Some companies aren't waiting for lower customer demand; they're anticipating it, so they're laying off people now. Kind of almost a self-serving prophecy of creating that sort of thing.
Well said.
So the beauty of Spokane is we don't enjoy the high highs, but we also don't suffer from the low lows, right? Our service sector here and our economy kind of stays in that middle road, and we'll go up and down a bit, but we're not going to have this big Microsoft and Amazon lift and then this massive, just soul-sucking crunch to our economy. So it's nice to be in that middle space. But I do think the news of layoffs concern people. I think they probably make people realize maybe I should be really grateful for the company that I work for because I do have a good thing and it might increase loyalty.
Sure.
From that standpoint, we're seeing, as we read the news, the layoff in the tech side. So people who are hiring tech positions are I don't want to say grateful, because of course we don't want to see people lose
Of
their
course,
livelihood,
of
but
course,
they're happy there's an opportunity to recruit talent that maybe they didn't have before, because they were competing against Microsoft and Amazon and all of those big companies. But yes, we're seeing it in my banking sector with, again, large national companies. But that's, I think, where it typically starts, right?
Sure.
And it makes the news. You lay off 10 people, it's not going to be front page. You lay off 10,000, you have a few more zeros behind that.
Sure.
Yeah, you're on all the news alerts.
Yeah.
Laying off that big number.
Yeah.
So this cycle and this worker friendly kind of supply issue of economics, I think I anticipate, I don't know, will shift.
Sure.
Pretty dramatically.
Sure. Sure.
In my opinion.
And so it's interesting that you mentioned pre-recession, because it feels like it's been a long time at this point that we've been talking about a potential looming recession.
Right.
And I do wonder how much of that is become part of the psyche in some of these decisions.
Right, kind of self-serving prophecy. And the economists will tell you, and I know you have one next week or next month in February.
Yeah.
You say you're in a recession once you have some data to prove it. So it's more of going back,
right,
2 cycles and saying, guess you were in a recession that entire time. And you think, oh, okay, because now the data has to go back looking to validate it. Yeah.
It's true.
But I think people have felt wage pressure. They felt inflationary measures with gas, even if they're not commuting as much. So, there was a lot of conversation in 2022 among a lot of employers around some of the lower paid positions and what do we do to ease some of that pain, or is that our responsibility to ease that pain?
Sure.
Instead of complaining about gas, maybe they should take the bus or carpool, right? But they were feeling the effects of those pain points of higher prices. But at the same time, if you looked, they were getting higher pay too the last few years or couple years, because employers were in that tight labor market where they had to pay more.
Sure.
Now you go tell a 25-year-old, well, back in my day, I never earned that. And, they think gas was a quarter, but it's part of that getting through those positions and building your career, but nonetheless, employers still have to pay attention to that, because if they don't have this group of staff working for them and keeping the engine of their company going, they're not going to get anywhere. So it was a real conversation in 2022 for sure. So that the inflation side. Now we get to talk about recession.
Yeah.
Never a dull moment.
No, definitely not. This would be a good time to mention that we're going to be taking your questions later in the program, and you can type them into our question and answer feature at any time. And when we're finished with our conversation, we'll get to some of your questions.
Great.
So on kind of staying on that theme of things happening at the national level and wondering whether they're going to filter down into Spokane, I wanted to return to the remote work subject, because
that's a big one.
It is. And so last week there was a story that came out about Starbucks had said to its corporate employees, everybody's coming back at least 3 days a week, and Tuesday and Wednesday are mandatory. Yeah. And so, which doesn't exactly sound like an iron fist to someone who spent his whole career in an office, but I'm sure it does to some people who are accustomed to remote work. And so is that something that we're seeing more broadly now, or is it something you think we'll see more broadly in the future?
I love this question. And as an HR head, I think about this a lot, sometimes at 2 a.m. Remote work is a double-edged sword for many employers. Because of the tight job market, they felt that they needed to offer it because they couldn't get enough candidates, right?
Sure.
But but also it was a lovely perk because it offered flexibility. I think at the end of the day, what employees want and what I think is reasonable for employers to grant is flexibility.
Sure.
I don't think we're going to be in this every employer has to grant at least a couple days of remote work, or else you'll find no one to work for you in 5 years. I think this is not going to be the state of the union forever. In fact, I think it's going to flip back to more in-office corporate work like you and I have done Monday through Friday, 8 to 5 forever. When you see big leaders start to put a line in the sand and make those changes. So Starbucks said 3 days, Microsoft, Amazon, Apple, Disney said 4. There's a big difference between 3 and 4 days, right?
Sure.
So they basically said, here's the deal, everybody. 80% of the time, you're in this building, and 20% you can figure that out. 1 day a week on average, you can figure out where you need to be. At the end of the day, I think flexibility is great for everybody.
Sure.
If you're in a sales role and you have a meeting outside at 9:00, you know what? Drive to the office, check your email, then go there. Just do that from home, right?
Sure.
Flexibility is important. Flexibility for working parents when they have a sick child who's not so sick they need to be attended to all the time. They could work from home those days.
Sure.
So building that in, and a lot of employers, of course, did that pre-pandemic as well. But I do think we're going to get past these sort of what feels to some like some rigid rules of, man, if I don't say that my building's going to be half empty half the time, I'm never going to find someone to work for me, because that tide will shift a bit. And I think that's okay. I think it's okay to say, hey, you know what? Depending on our industry, our culture, your job groups, we really do need you here.
Sure.
And there are valid reasons to be in person instead of on a screen, even though we're on a screen right now. This is very efficient. It's great. I've attended these, and it's really nice to log on at 3:59 instead of, rushing somewhere. So there's absolute great uses for technology.
Sure.
But creativity, innovation, and sometimes just ease of communication. We don't have to worry about a storm taking out someone's internet. I can't hear you, Lynn. What? In fact, years ago, Google, I love this, created what they called the Google Bump.
Okay.
And they have a cafeteria on site.
I don't know about this.
Yeah, this is a cool deal. And they have a cafeteria before people had, like big fancy cafeteria because they're Google, right? Years ago. And they very intentionally put their cafeteria seats, it wasn't just a matter of having so many employees they couldn't fit, but they intentionally put them kind of close together. So when you go to the cafeteria, you sit down, you accidentally bump into somebody. And their HR chief called that the Google bump. And he said from those accidental interactions, plus it was part of their culture to create a lot of organic conversations. Things like Google News came out literally over the water fountain because someone said, man, it'd be nice if there's one portal where I could just see all the news sites instead of having to go to the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, and this and that.
Sure.
And it planted those seeds. Now some people say, well, that's Google. That's a really creative industry. I can't do that. Sure. You totally can. You can create opportunities for organic conversation collaboration in any industry.
Sure.
Banking's pretty left-brained and analytical, but you know what? Accounting firms, banks, engineers, architects, all of those people with these quote left-brain jobs still have a lot of right-brain needs to them.
Mm-hmm.
And creating opportunities for creativity is just plain easier in person than it is through remote. And a 22-year-old might argue with me and say, I can be just as creative online because I grew up gaming and that's how I socialized with people. And that's a great skill they have to relate online that others may not have.
Sure.
Nonetheless, it's still just easier to be 3 feet away from somebody and talk. And if you're growing your career and you want to move up the ladder, it's nice to be there in person. So if something amazing happens, you have someone walks in, you get to say, hey, come here. I want you to meet this person. This could be a potential new client for you.
Sure.
Missed account exec, and they're there, seize the opportunity. So I do feel like in person has many, many advantages. And I'm don't know if I should say this out loud to all my employees, but I just did. I'm secretly kind of glad these bigger employers are putting lines in the sand, because once they start, the rest of the employment markets can follow, because then you're not the outlier.
Sure.
It's kind of like, well, even Amazon only says a couple days a week. So don't tell me I have to let you work 5 or you won't work here, because eventually you run out of companies to apply to.
Absolutely.
That makes sense.
And the good news is we've proved we can do it. We've proved that we can work remotely.
Right.
A lot of us knew it already, but we know that as an entire organization, we can operate remotely, and the wheels aren't going to fall off.
Totally. And banks especially saw that with the PPP loans,
Sure.
Lots of banks.
Sure. That's a great example.
We ran an entire lending platform digitally 24 hours a day to serve our customers and our communities through $1.9 billion of PPP loans.
Mm-hmm.
And it was all done through It's none of this. It was
Yeah.
all remote. Yeah. So we know we can do it. It's just, should we do that as the norm? And
Yeah.
every company has to decide for themselves. But right now the market's like, yes, you should do whatever the employees want, or you will find no candidates.
Yeah.
That's going to switch. But
Just one more thing on remote work. And you mentioned, you're going to sound old. Well, I'm going to sound old real quick.
we're in good company.
Or as old as I am. One of the things about being in the office that I've always considered a benefit is having a better finger on the pulse of what's happening within the organization and the tenor of what's going on. And so I'm not saying that I couldn't, I'm just talking for myself personally, I'm not saying that I couldn't work remotely full time. It's just, it feels like there would be a sense of discomfort by not being able to gather the intelligence basically that you have in the office.
Yeah. And the camaraderie, right?
Sure.
Too.
Yeah. That's a much nicer thing to say. Camaraderie.
Yeah. Well, but
camaraderie, not intelligence.
Okay.
Yeah.
But reading people and being a good leader who says, hey, is everything okay?
Yeah.
You seem a little down today. You can't really, that's a little harder to do on a 2-inch screen, right?
Possible, but hard.
Yeah.
So, but for now, we are still in an environment where a lot of large employers, or a lot of employers, period, are struggling to attract and retain employment. So, are there any recruiting tools or best practices that you've seen or used?
Yeah, I think this is where we really have to be right-brained to be really creative. And I've seen stuff out there that, we never would have seen years ago. We have to rethink how we find people, just like businesses had to re-engineer how they deliver services and products to stay relevant and competitive over the years, especially with the advent of more technology. We have to think about how we employ people. So of course, we've been creative with technology and remote work and all that, but you have to be creative with how you find them.
Sure.
So the old, I'm going to put a job posting and people are going to come to me. In this market, people aren't going to come to you. You have to go to them.
Sure.
And you have to go to them in really creative ways. So TikTok, a lot of companies are using TikTok, and they're even hiring influencers to promote their company, especially if you're going after a certain demographic, right?
Yeah.
Now, I guess if they wanted us, Lynn, they'd probably have to go to Facebook. But if they want everyone under 40, they would go to 30. I don't know. They go to TikTok.
Sure.
But finding ways to reach people. So I have a Sonos at home, and I had to do the dreaded 1-800 technical help. And I'm pretty tech savvy, and I was plugging everything in, but I'd moved some things and taken away old stuff, and I had to call.
Sure.
And I call and I get somebody who was really, really helpful. And I remember thinking, I wonder if they just walk around like Circuit City or Best Buy and find the really nerdy person who has a passion for speakers and say, hey, would you like to come work for us? Because you have to find someone who really cares and knows and kind of geeks out over that, right?
Sure.
So I think about the proactive reaching out. So businesses, some of them are really good about hanging signs that apologize for slow service because they're short-staffed.
Yeah,
We've seen that.
Yeah.
Becker Buick took it one step further, had my car fixed there. They usually have a complimentary car wash.
Yeah.
The sign says, I'm so sorry, we can't give you your complimentary car wash. We're short-staffed. And a lot of businesses stop there. Zips has it in their drive-thru, et cetera.
Yeah, sure.
They said, so if you know somebody, please send them our way. And I thought, what a great way to not just state the problem and get buy-in and understanding why I can't get my free car wash, but to then have the customer help you find people.
Sure.
So recruiting that way through digital channels, having the customers help you find people, maybe rethinking your requirements. Do you need a bachelor's degree for that job? If you loosened up those requirements, would you get more people?
Right.
And rewording and marketing, get your marketing people to write your job postings for you and use words that people care about. Flexible, energetic, collaborative, empowered, all the things. Think about, if I were the person I'm trying to get, what's important to me? What are those words? And use those words, assuming, of course, that they're accurate and you can deliver on those promises.
Of course.
And use some really good messaging. And referrals, always ask for referrals because people seem to know other people. But it is hard. There's no doubt about it. It's hard to find people. But we got to turn it on its head and be really creative and figure out how to, the help wanted sign isn't enough anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. Not just the ad in the newspaper.
Not just the ad in the newspaper, though we do love the newspaper and the ads are good, but yes. Yes.
So what kind of trends are we seeing in terms of pay and perks? You talked a little bit about wage inflation, and wages went up last year on the whole, not quite as much, or well, not nearly as much as inflation in general.
Right.
But what trends do you see moving forward in that regard?
Reward theory has always said match it to what the person wants. So
Okay.
What's salient to your person, which means as managers, you have to get to know them at some level and find out and ask. Across the board, pay, I can tell you, has been very competitive. McDonald's, you see signs, $17.50 an hour.
Sure.
Certain states you work in, our minimum wage has increased a lot, tied to CPI. So this year was a big jump. So there's some things that control the rate of pay that you can't do as an employer. You will have to pay what it takes to get someone there. We've had colleagues in other businesses say, I have to pay A salaries to get C players, because it's just this crazy sort of collusion and all these things are going up. So to compete against that, especially if you're a small business and you can't pay every entry-level job $20 an hour, find some really cool perks, flexibility, remote work. A lot of people have already done this, getting past you have to start at 8. Well, okay, you could start at 8:15, you could start at 9. What is meaningful to your employees? What things do you have access to that they want?
Sure.
Dress code. A lot of that has changed because of the pandemic, but that could be something employers have control over.
Absolutely.
Things that you can expense as an employer that are meaningful to your people through subscriptions to things, whether it's for reward services, for rewarding, it could be cleaning services, it could be tickets to a ZAG game, it could be tickets to the symphony. These little touches that actually really mean a lot. And at the end of the year, employees feel really valued by that.
Right.
Now, if the base pay isn't there as kind of a defensive position, that's not going to help. But if that's there, and then you do these touches and you create an empowered culture of support and achievement and celebrating success, and you throw in some perks now and then that they care about, that makes the difference. So when someone calls for, $1 more an hour, they say, no, I'm good here. I've tried to ask my people, or just pay attention. And that's where going back, you talked about some watching people and picking up on things, paying attention to what they talk about as their needs. Right. And so I surprised somebody once with a few months of a house cleaning service, because that was something that was really important to her, and something she just didn't have time for with really small children. So just listening and then surprising people with something of a perk is great. I think the normal perks are always still there of gym memberships, but even gyms people are doing in their homes. And so that's an industry that's taken a beating, right? Yeah. But the pay will level off. The economics will. It's a battle out there for sure. Sure.
One more question, and then we'll get to some of the audience questions there. But I don't expect you to have a complete answer to this, but I am curious to know if you have any thoughts on the childcare crisis, because when I thought back to, we had a similar conversation last year at this time on talent acquisition with Brian Fix, who was at Providence at the time. And so one of the things that was really on a lot of people's minds at that time was the struggle that people were having to find childcare when they had kids of preschool or elementary school age. Do you have any sense for whether that environment has improved, or if that's still something that's limiting employment?
Yeah, that's a great question. And you and I had kids in preschool together.
Exactly.
And I remember thinking my preschool daycare bill is more than my mortgage. But I was in a job where I could afford the mortgage and the daycare. So yes, I think that is a big issue, and it's a societal issue. And something we need to address. And that's where maybe flexibility can help. There are jobs that cannot be done with a 2-year-old screaming in the background, right? And they need more attention than you can give them intermittently. But if someone has a childcare, can we look at the jobs and how we do them, and could they be done in different ways that allow people to not have to incur large childcare expenses? Could they go half-time because you let them work at 6 a.m. to 9 and then go to daycare and then work again? Can you break their shifts up, is what I'm trying to say, depending on the job? Can you offer remote flexibility? Go pick up the older children, get them on their way. They don't want to hang out with you at a certain point, so if they're junior high, you pick them up, they say bye, you go back and you work from home. So you're in the house at least, so they don't burn the thing down. So you can be flexible on one-offs, but as a society, certainly the impact of women in the workforce has been impacted, and we saw more women leave the workforce.
It's been documented
in COVID, absolutely, because of childcare. Because they wanted to be the ones to be home with those children. So they left the workforce. Side note, people in COVID, we lost part of that workforce through deaths because of COVID. There's 500,000 people between the ages of 18 and 64 that could have been in the workforce that weren't. So the childcare piece and the impact on not always women, but mostly women that leave for childcare versus men has been significant. So as a society, we need to solve it. And I don't have a really great, concise answer on that. But that is a thing that impacts businesses and families. And typically, statistically, the person who's in a lower paying job where childcare expenses are a big burden to them tends to have a household partner also in that same realm.
Oh, okay.
Right. So they're both feeling the pinch of that childcare expense, because you're not going to not always have a high earner with a lower earner that can cover. The stats show that sometimes you tend to have multiple people in one household in low earning jobs, and that childcare bill just becomes untenable between the two of them. And that's a crisis and really unfortunate. I don't think that's it's going to be solved right away, but certainly needs to be.
And it's not cyclical, but
it's not cyclical. I mean, kids are born every day, and kids need to be cared for every day, and that no matter what the economy is, I think childcare has always been expensive. Childcare is expensive when things were flipped the other way than now.
Yeah. I'd never thought of the notion that my childcare bill was higher than my mortgage at that time.
It's probably good you didn't think about it.
It's 110% true.
It is, yeah. I'm not sure if that means we live in a low mortgage or high daycare. It was high daycare.
I'd take it though.
Yeah, but it's worth it.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
for sure. Jeff, do we have any questions from the audience yet?
Yeah, Paul, we have Lynn, we have two questions. This one's from Christopher. What are your thoughts on the FTC's recent proposed ban on non-compete agreements?
Oh, interesting question.
Oh, yeah. So people have a right to make a living, absolutely. And non-competes and non-solicitation agreements have been discussed in the legal arenas in the news for quite a while, actually. And they've evolved over the years from you could allow a non-compete or non-competition agreement for somebody within a certain geographic radius. So you could still work in this industry, but you might have to do it 100 miles away. Those have been chipped away through some regulations in the side of the employee versus the employer to allow them to go have that opportunity to make a living. I think given now with remote work and the ability to make a living not tied to a geographic zip code, that certainly changes the competitive nature a bit. I don't know if it'll help employers, because now instead of going from my bank to another one, they'll work remotely and work for a bank out of Minneapolis. I don't know if that'll help. But it does make it it makes it harder for employers when you can't necessarily guarantee that someone who worked for you isn't going to take intellectual property and customers right next door to a competitor. That's a good question.
Yeah, great question.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's tricky.
Next question from Todd. What do you feel can help with talent acquisition in the trade industries over the next few years, such as truck drivers, carpenters, plumbers, electricians, etc.?
You know, it's funny. I follow Mike Rowe on Instagram, and he just had an interview with somebody where
I'm sorry, who do you follow on Instagram?
Mike Rowe.
Oh, sure.
ROWE, Mike Rowe Works from Dirty Jobs. And he interviewed somebody about this pending legislation that would disallow the gig economy for truckers, for independent truckers. So I'm glad you asked that question, because it made me think about the gig economy and flexibility, because that's another reason, childcare being one of them, for instance, where people say, I'm going to leave the traditional job and go do something where I can be more flexible with my schedules and my shifts, work when I want to work. Trucking could be something like that, where, especially if you own your own truck and you hire on when needed, when you can or want to work and you're available. So this whole talk was about banning independent contractors for trucking, and not allowing people to be in those roles and to go work for a trucking company. So in terms of recruiting, which if you're asking from a trucking company, you might say, that's great. Yes, I'm not sure which side you're on. But regardless, recruiting trades, I would say also go where they are. Go put ads where they shop, where they buy supplies, where they hang out. Go where the people are. So if you know your employees and you can make some generalizations of things they like to do and where they typically would be, then go to those businesses and ask if you could speak to the customers, if you could hang up a sign, if you could post something. I guess that's it. Go where the people are, and create some training, do some training opportunities, pay for their trucking school, but have a clawback. If they leave within a year, they have to pay you back some of that investment, so that you get some stickiness with them. You can kind of think of some creative ways to look at candidates that maybe have zero skills that you could bring up and train and bring into your workforce. Yeah, I know there's a company in town that was recruiting in high school it's a company with a lot of trades workers. And these are good union jobs that pay $70,000, $80,000 right out of high school with good benefits. And they said, if we're recruiting in high school, we're too late. We got to go to junior high kids and say, hey, you know what? College isn't for everybody. Come here. We will train you. We'll tie you in for a few years because we invest all this money, but you can have a great job the day after you graduate high school. And he's going to junior highs in Spokane to start planting that seed.
Sure. Makes sense.
Yeah.
Let's see, last question here. Are Spokane area businesses moving towards approving work visas from foreign countries to mitigate their workforce issues?
Getting an international visa is a time-consuming and somewhat expensive process. So I don't know if they would do that to mitigate the competitive labor market within Spokane. I'm not an international lawyer, so I can't speak to that, but I don't know. I know some businesses are outsourcing things to international third-party firms, right? Because it's cheaper, or they can't find labor here. I haven't seen a trend where a lot of businesses are doing international visas because they can't find anybody. The trend I see is we're going to go hire an IT person in Texas because that's where the talent is. And sometimes those states feel international, depending on what you're used to.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. All right.
I don't have a good answer for that.
Anything else? Any closing thoughts?
Hang in there. I know it's hard. But this won't last forever. This pendulum will swing back, and it's a great opportunity for employers to flex their creative muscles and how they go where the people are, how they find them. Once you get them, keep them. Turnover is expensive, and survey your people and ask what is important to them, from culture, pay, perks, career growth, all of those things. Just ask and be available and listen. And I think people could be pleasantly surprised. It might be easier to retain talent than they thought by just sitting down and having a conversation about it.
Good stuff.
People. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Katy.
Yeah,
great to see you.
It's nice to see you as well.
Yeah. And
great to see your kids all grown up since daycare together.
Getting big.
Yeah.
Getting big. We've all come a long way.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, thank you for joining us. Great start to the year. Appreciate you being here. Please join us next month. We have Vanj Ocasio-Hockheimer joining us to talk about inflation, something we touched on a little bit today.
Yep.
And so she's an economist and a professor at Whitworth, as many of you know, and can't wait to hear what she has to say. Until then, stay safe and enjoy the longer days, somewhat
Yeah.
longer days.
Yeah, a little bit of light out there. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.